Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Holy Paladin has finally gotten some major changes, and we're here to go over all of them. Without reading everything to you, the full list is in the description down below. We're going to talk about how things are actually playing. Number one, first and foremost, Glimmer and Daybreak have been removed, okay? That is a pretty significant change to the spec, of course, since Glimmer's been around since BFA, but it's progressively gotten worse and worse and worse until it's just not feeling that good whatsoever. Replacing it are a number of talents and adjustments that are putting a lot of power into your spenders and putting a lot of power into Holy Shock. Extrication is replacing Glimmer at the top of the talent tree, where your Word of Glory and Light of Dawn are gaining up to 30% additional chance on top of your regular crit chance to crit strike based on the target's current health. Lower health they are, more chance you have to crit strike. This feels incredibly powerful for spot healing, for pushing up health bars. It's insanely good and very fun to be able to play with. Love being able to utilize this along the way. They also are adding some really powerful other talents, namely one called Truth Prevails, where your judgment is healing you and its cost is reduced, and then half of the overhealing that you might do is then transferred to other allies along the way. This was really easily doing like 4 or 5% of my healing, which is kind of a lot for a 1-point node, since you're having Beacon feed right into it on the talent tree, since they kind of shuffled things around some more. And so it feels really significantly powerful. So I played with both Lightsmith and with Herald of the Sun in some of the dungeons that we have. Obviously, raid testing hasn't happened yet, but we'll keep an eye on it as it continues. But what I was doing was I was playing with a build that's a little bit more centric to just kind of building and spending your holy power. So building up with, of course, your holy shocks and then just spending them on Word of Glory or Eternal Flame. Lightsmith was having a number of buffs coming in for their sacred weapons, and I think they overbuffed it or something is bugged with it, because it was absolutely doing ridiculously insane damage, especially when I was buffing mages along the way. I know previous weeks it was like Windwalker monks had some kind of bugged effect to it, so yeah, you want to play with some really high damage? Lightsmith is going to be the sauce for you, throwing those sacred weapons onto allies, having them pump up huge amounts of damage. But from a healing perspective, I can say Lightsmith felt really good because the shields felt significant, and then the additional healing when you cast a weapon, it's not like a Druid's Treant where you can kind of actively see it healing, but you can kind of feel a little bit more support healing coming around the corner from that sacred weapon, and you can really notice when you toss the bulwarks, the shields onto your allies, the additional absorb onto that one individual, and of course onto yourself. You become very tanky as a result of some of these talent setups. One of the talents I really wish they would have adjusted was Saved by the Light. They made a new adjustment with a talent called Glistening Radiance, where spending holy power can kind of trigger the absorb effect of Saved by the Light for a reduced value. I tried this and I really personally enjoy that effect of Saved by the Light, even though it's been mid for a very long time. And it kind of still seems mid at this point, unfortunately. So from our other testing, they made a change to Rising Sunlight, where previously you would use Daybreak and absorb the Glimmer effects, and then your follow-up Holy Shocks would actually hit really hard. So what they've changed it to be is now after casting your wings, it's not proccing from your Awakening wings, it's just casting wings or casting Divine Toll. After either of those abilities, your next 2 Holy Shocks cast 2 additional times. These felt really significant, and by running with it, I didn't really miss Tears Deliverance really at all. I noticed that in conjunction with my set bonus, there was good synergy across the board. I would hit wings and I would have lots of power regardless of which of the hero talents that I was playing, consistently all of the way through. Same thing when I was using Divine Toll. The follow-up Holy Shocks felt really powerful, really noticeable, and my spenders felt awesome alongside of it. So really enjoyed that. They also made a change since Glimmer is gone to Overflowing Light, which was previously on Glimmer's Overheal. Now it's on Holy Shock Overheal, and at least at the moment, there's not that much Overheal from Holy Shock, so I didn't really feel a ton of value from that, but this might be a little bit better of a talent later on down the line. From a dungeon perspective and just overall healing, whether I was playing with Herald or Lightsmith, Herald recently got some nerfs, but I didn't think it was like that bad. I noticed that I am not really having good agency and like pushing up health bars together at the same time. I was playing with Virtue a few different times, and I noticed This is the ability that is eating all of my mana, pretty much like every single time. You can have damage reduction. It used to be that Glimmer would give damage reduction. Now that talent has rolled over to getting Beacon damage reduction. And so I was trying with both regular Beacon and then of course with Virtue to help with my AoE healing. But the biggest mana issue I had was specifically with Virtue. It just kind of munches up mana like a ridiculous, crazy amount along the way. Felt good to be able to play with, especially when I was doing some of the more overtuned bosses that have huge bursts of AoE damage, because you can kind of like funnel huge output into your allies, especially when they're low health, by hitting a huge Word of Glory into them to help top them off. But it was very, very noticeable how much of an impact it really had on my mana. Otherwise, I know people had concerns about Daybreak's mana return, but when I was running Reclamation for the Holy Shock refunds and when I was running Truth Prevails, I didn't really feel like I was running out of mana or had any issues unless I was using Virtue. And so I pretty easily was able to just kind of play it where I'm using Builder Spenders to be able to assist my output along the way. I was also trying to make sure I was getting more value out of Judgment thanks to what we talked about with Truth Prevails. And I noticed that I was having a really big amount of output thanks to Greater Judgment and Truth Prevails together. And so it kind of loads a ton of output into your Judgment casts, even though they're kind of largely passive. The issue I did have when I was playing Paladin, and again, maybe it's a playstyle issue and some adjustments, was that I didn't feel like my other Infusion procs, because you're casting so many Holy Shocks, I didn't feel like I had a really good outlet for most of my Infusion procs. I could spend a lot of them on Judgments with like Greater Judgment and stuff, and I was running with Inflorescence of the Sunwell, though after that point, it feels like you have the option between casting this immensely long but powerful Holy Light cast, or you cast a Flash, which is mostly free or nearly free, and then it doesn't really hit for that much at all. So I think what I might try to do in some of our following builds is mess around with Tower of Radiance, which I was not running previously, where casting Flash or Holy Light gives you holy power. And then I'm already using imbued infusions where consuming the infusion gives you a holy shock. And so I might try to aggressively use infusions, like excess infusions that I didn't spend on Judgment, and spend them on flash heals to be able to get more infusions consumed, to get more holy shocks, to just continue the holy shock train. But it felt really, really noticeable about how much better Word of Glory is as a spender. Light of Dawn, not that great so far, unfortunately, but we'll keep an eye on it. At the moment, I think it was doing on average 30% less healing or something like that in dungeons than the Word of Glories, but maybe some of that is going to be the proc chances or the crit chances, since I was casting so many more Word of Glories on some of like the low health allies along the way. One of the things I wasn't really messing around with was melee wings, as it feels like it was still pretty underpowered the previous week that I had messed around with it, where I felt like I'd get a couple of casts off and then get some decent value out of it, but not overly too much. So I'll keep an eye on that and I'll update you guys if things change. The big downsides, though, that I would say to Holy Paladin at the moment is it still feels like I have a little bit too much in terms of maintenance abilities. And what I mean by that is Summer. I despise Blessing of Summer. I don't feel like it provides a significant output increase when I'm pressing the button. Like, I know it does, and I know it's like supposed to, and then I hit the button and I just don't feel a connection to, oh wow, I'm like helping the group, I'm doing healing, I'm adding on output in other areas like the way that your Judgment is, right? Even if it's not direct. I feel such a disconnect when utilizing this ability, and I really dislike some of like the timing aspect of like wanting to time using this ability on top of somebody using damage. I'd really just much rather get rid of the ability in its entirety, and I really hate how it is gating Awakening, because how important Awakening is for Herald of the Sun and for Lightsmith, whichever one is on top, both of them really like Awakening. You really like those extra wing procs to give you more Dawn Lights. You really like them to be able to get you more of those sacred weapons flying all over the place. It's just a great ability, and I don't want to take Merciful Auras for this like little trickle leech to everybody. I also feel like Tears Deliverance's numbers are really bad at this point. They've continuously nerfed this ability, just like they've been nerfing Daybreak and Glimmer really for a long time, that I don't know if they can like roll it off to the side and kind of like shove it off to the side and work on some kind of caster-centric focus for it. But I feel pretty good not taking it, and I almost wonder if just getting rid of Tears Deliverance, or again, adjusting the talent so it's only focused on caster stuff off to the side might be a better use for that ability. Otherwise, I feel like I'm kind of lacking good talent points, or I have certain talent points which are really significant in their output, much like Awakening, or even things like Glorious Dawn, where I have the extra chance to get my Holy Shocks reset, but then I kind of have to like path down to get it through things that feel not as powerful, like Crusader's Might or something like that. That's an area that's been really confusing in terms of how they are balancing the output of Holy Paladin's various talents. So at this point, that's probably my big complaint, is the spec tree feels a little bit odd, where there is sort of this crossover where I feel like I have all these infusion procs and I have to like be incentivized to cast them, even though I'm actively in melee building and spending holy power as rapidly as I can and not really casting those spells, right? From a class tree perspective, well, there really hasn't been any changes thus far. So things like Strength of Conviction, where you're needing to be in your Consecrate to use your spenders and have them be 20% stronger, still feels just like an absolute nightmare. Holy Pally, like everybody else, also got some effects to their self-survivability with things like Strength of Conviction getting nerfed, so you're not having as much avoidance, but again, that kind of happened to everybody. Also not a fan of, Dusk and Dawn still. I really just don't like having these extra modifiers and extra sort of like trackers to your abilities on top of what we're already getting with your hero talents. For example, some of the talents with like Herald of the Sun, for example, are like supercharging these occasional Holy Shocks. And so sometimes your Holy Shock is going to hit for a solid amount, and then other times you're just straight lay on handsing somebody. And so there's this odd sort of like, whoa, like scared moment sometimes when you're playing Paladin, where some abilities just hit way harder than you're expecting them to. And then you're like, oh, well, I guess I just had a proc, and like now the proc's gone. So I think the spec is still fairly bloated with a number of different modifiers that are changing the expected outcome for how hard your abilities are going to hit. And so there's kind of those moments where I'm like hoping when I have Virtue out and someone's low health and I want to hit a Word of Glory and I hope that it tops them off and I hope that it crits, and it may or may not, right? I think my big view at the moment with Holy Paladin is that you feel really, really strong as a spot healer, but trying to deal with the constant pulsing AoE damage that some dungeon fights are going to have, and maybe even like the raid environment of what they might be throwing at you, I'm still a little undecided on. I still don't feel like Tears Deliverance really delivers much in the way of output these days with how much it's been nerfed, and I almost wonder if either separating it so you're only going to run it in a very caster-centric style might be worthwhile, or just getting rid of it entirely and letting it go in the same way as Daybreak, so that you are just having more space for your Holy Shocks to hit hard, your spenders to hit hard, and you follow up with that bread and butter. I'd also love it if there was some universe where I had all of my casts from Infusion being accelerated. I know I've taken Divine Favor for casting Barrier of Faith or Prism, and then casting the follow-up like Holy Light, which feels faster. That's pretty good, like every 30 seconds or so. But outside of that, I just feel glutted with Infusion procs, and I'm kind of like just racking my brain, finding ways to be able to spend them, to properly utilize all of them, and get, value from it. Because one of the problems Paladin had in Dragonflight was you were getting glutted with these resources that it felt bad to spend. It felt bad to use all your spenders, and it was encouraged at one point to be overcapping on your resources. And so I hope that we don't get to a point where you're overcapping on infusions or you're overcapping on holy power, and continue to actually make sure that the resources you generate feel valuable, feel significant, and every single time you want to be excited that you're getting them. That's probably the biggest thing for me, is I don't feel like that kind of connection, at least with Infusion at the moment, is there. I'm going to try it out, like I said before, with Tower of Radiance, use it on flash heals to consume more infusions more rapidly to kind of feed more Holy Shocks. And we'll see where it takes us. Right now, if you're looking for some fun, again, try Lightsmith. It's bugged, it's gonna get fixed, but boy is it a lot of damage, and it's really cool to see. In general, I am extremely happy that Blizzard is taking action on this. I would not be surprised if tiers or other abilities start getting continued tuning and adjustments and fiddling around, but I am just beyond thrilled that they're taking action and we're seeing some progress, because we do have the time and space for them to constantly be working on it. So I'm very stoked. Gonna make sure there's more updates and everything coming as we see them, or if some of my thoughts change. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Huge thank you to our patrons, our Twitch subscribers, and our YouTube members for making all this content possible, and many more updates to come as the War Within beta progresses. Thank you for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all next time.